Let's hear now from Betsy Clarke. Unless there's an urgent question, I'm encouraging folks to write them down. I've got some questions already and or put them in the chat, and I will ask them for you. But Betsy.
So if people can see my screen, in preparation for this summit, we were concerned about what has been the experience of children with virtual hearings in Illinois. And thanks to the cooperation of the Independent Ombudsperson's Office and the Department of Juvenile Justice, we were able to go into 3 juvenile prisons in Illinois a week ago and talk with, and the sample is small, 6 children. These were children who were sentenced to juvenile prison in the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, resulting from court hearings that were conducted virtually, in these cases over Zoom. We did a informal, this is obviously not a quantitatively reliable survey, but we did an informal survey, gave each child the questions that we were going to ask, and then and provided a copy to facility staff. And I want to thank the Department of Juvenile Justice for their cooperation, making these meetings with these children possible at such short notice. It was really extraordinary. As I go through here, while not all children identified as male, I'm going to refer to them all with male pronouns. And I did not ask their names, did not ask anything about their specific charge or the term that they had in the juvenile prison. It was all focused on this issue of their experience of a virtual court hearing. And in talking with these 6 children, it really, you cannot talk to children in juvenile prison without being struck by the issues that were present, the disparities present in our system pre-pandemic. And that is this broader context of these long-standing racial disparities and concerns over deprivations of rights for children in conflict with the law in this country. So of these 6 children, 5 were children of color. None of the 6 children had had a lawyer with them during interrogation by the police. And all of the 6 children reported that their confinement was the result of a plea. And I think this is so important to keep this context in mind. The racial disparities, the lack of access to a lawyer from the very beginning of the case, and the extensive use of guilty pleas in our court system. These are issues that you must put in the context as you look at the impact of virtual hearings. Now, they all had rights under international human rights to a lawyer from the beginning. They all had right to deprivation of liberty as a last result, particularly during a pandemic. And I do want to note one other thing that really struck me with every one of these children was how not just respectful they were to me, how thoughtful their responses were. They were all productively engaged in education or training efforts, and they all have hopes and dreams for their future that are realistic and productive and will hopefully come to pass. Again, the difference really between looking at figures in a study or somebody over Zoom and actually physically sitting down and meeting with them, it's striking. None had the protection of a lawyer during their initial questioning by the police. And when asked if this would have made a difference, one child was particularly vocal, indicating it would have made all the difference. As he panicked, he said he felt very anxious. A lawyer would have helped him be calmer, less emotional in his responses, more thoughtful in his responses. And another child said he didn't even know he had a right to a lawyer during questioning. All 6 children reported that the first meeting with a lawyer was virtual and not in person. And actually only one child had an in-person meeting with a lawyer while he was in detention. And all of these children were in detention. They did not have trials from home. They had trials from detention. And that child who had a lawyer come and visit him, it was a privately retained lawyer who met with him in person while he was in detention. He said he understood what was happening because of this in-person meeting and felt that his conversation was truly private, so he felt safe sharing more with his lawyer. The detention hearing, some were delayed due to the pandemic. They were all virtual. One child reported it was extremely difficult to understand what was happening, and he had to go into a breakout room to speak with his lawyer. The trial or plea, in this case, and sentencing, all the children report their current commitment was the result of a plea. One child said he had had a trial in an earlier case. At least two of the children had had at least one in-person court hearing where they could meet in person with their lawyer so they could compare the experience. They said they had a better understanding of what was happening as a result. One child said in court he could hear more clearly. Another noted he could speak with his lawyer with more privacy. This issue of privacy was huge during these meetings. One child said the computer was in an office and a staff person was in the office with him. Another said a caseworker was in the room with him. And another reported that somebody was sitting just right outside the door and the door was cracked open. A child reported he didn't know how to speak with his lawyer during the virtual court hearing. And another said he could have asked more questions if court had been in person. And one child reported the court seemed rushed for time and that he couldn't speak privately with a lawyer because the court was so rushed. And this issue of being rushed was reported by children as feeling that both by court and by staff sometimes when they were using computers in the detention center, that staff was rushing them. So lack of privacy during virtual proceedings and meetings, lack of confidence in privacy in Zoom breakout rooms. And in conclusion, all of the children concluded it was better to be in person when speaking with their lawyer and to be in person in court. They said, I understand more in person. The judge understands me better in person. I could hear better in court. I had more privacy when I met with my lawyer in person, so I could share more information. It was easier to ask questions in person. The technical glitches during virtual hearings caused me anxiety. Virtual court hearings were very rushed, so I had no time to talk to my lawyer. And the judge didn't talk to me as much as to my lawyer, especially in the Zoom hearing. I know that some of the respondents are going to talk about this. It is always extraordinary to remove a child from their home and lock them up, but to do it in the middle of a pandemic when congregate settings pose an extra risk of disease and death is particularly stunning. That this was done perhaps out of arguable necessity in the very beginning of the pandemic, but that it continued to be done even when not necessary is really troubling, particularly when, and the fact that, at least from the experience of these children, some of the state was holding in later months some of the hearings in person. Some of the counties were continuing to hold Zoom hearings no matter what. So there was not a consistent use as well. Particularly when liberty is at stake, we should ensure all our children have the full range of legal protections throughout their case. And I just want to finish with what Ricky Watson, the director of the National Juvenile Justice Network, stated during a recent presentation. During the pandemic, there was a grave emotional and psychological burden on children left inside prisons, where family visitation was ended due to the pandemic, and where families were often without the technology and internet access necessary to visit virtually. So we can and we must do better than we did for these 6 children. And with that, I'm going to stop share, and Herschella, kick it back to you.
Thank you, Betsy.